Hi there, my name is Gina Ogilvie, and thank you so much for asking me to speak today. Um, I wanted to chat a little bit about doing a survey design, and I've actually used a lot of surveys in my work. And really, I usually start out with survey for a couple of reasons. I use it one in a larger study if I'm about to lead a clinical study or a big clinical trial to actually do feasibility. So, is this something women or men would be interested in doing? Would they participate? What are the barriers to participation? So, really, is kind of a feasibility sort of approach. The other angle, though, is I do a lot of behavioral surveys, really to understand the underpinnings of an individual's behavioral choices and whether or not they would engage in a preventative behavior or a therapeutic behavior, and what are some of the factors associated with doing that behavior. And I think it's very important when you're doing surveys to be really clear about what you're doing, and particularly to really think about what is the ultimate analysis plan. I find many times folks do a survey and they'll show it to me to actually review it, and I'll say, well, what's your main question? And they've got about 50 or 60 questions, and they actually have no ability to say to me what their one main question is. So it's really important to start out with that. And then the other really important thing for survey design actually is to have an underlying theory that helps to guide the design of the survey. So the particular story that I think is relevant is I used a survey to really understand some of the big changes in cervical cancer screening. So in the province and globally, we're going to be moving from a cytology-based screening program to an HPV-based screening program. And cytology has been one of the most successful screening programs. Women go yearly or biannually for their PAPs, and they're very comfortable, and it's part of their routine health exam. So a switch from something that women are very comfortable with, practitioners are very comfortable with, health systems are very comfortable with, to a system that maybe perhaps starts screening later, screening less frequently, and also is a screen that actually looks for cancer, but it looks for cancer using looking for the presence of an infectious agent that is sexually transmitted, may have some big implications. So I used a survey through a large clinical trial we were doing to really try to understand what were the factors that would permit women to use this or encourage them to use it or allow them to use it, and what were the factors that might dissuade them from using this type of screening. So how we went about doing that was, first thing was actually we settled on a theoretical model, and the theoretical model we use with theory of planned behavior, which really tries to look at what are the factors that are associated with a specific health action. We then met with experts in the field, women, as well as practitioners, to understand what might, from their perspective, be both barriers and factors that it would encourage them to get screened. We then, using the theory of planned behavior, looked at key influencers. So, what did people that they know think about HPV screening? What did agencies that they valued? What did their partners think? Was it a feasible and doable test for them? Were they concerned about contacting their partners? So we looked at a bunch of parameters, and then one of the important things was we actually piloted the survey. And when we piloted it, we got really important feedback from women about readability, comprehensibility, whether it took too long, and whether they actually felt that they had the right information to complete the survey. Once we got the pilot data back, we revised it, and then actually were able to retest it and get sort of final approval from the women. The other thing I think was important before we even had any of the surveys distributed was we actually had an analysis plan, and we actually had tables laid out of what we wanted to see answered. And that really forced us to make sure that we knew what our dependent variable was, what our independent variables were, what type of modeling we planned to do. So really thinking that through well in advance. We then actually used because these women were part of a large trial, we had all their email addresses, so we were actually able to, through fluid surveys, email all the women the surveys. And within about 2 months, we were able to get almost 1,000 valid responses. So that was a great response rate. And from that, we've published that survey. We've published, I think now 4 papers, because we really were able to tackle some key aspects of what would be the factors that would encourage women to be screened for cervical cancer screening in the new era of HPV-based screening. The analysis process was, like I said, I think it's really important that the analysis process be planned as you're designing the survey. So we actually used Likert scales, so from strongly disagree to strongly agree, but we actually did end up dichotomizing that into sort of yes or no. And then, so that was our dependent variable. And then we did basic bivariate analyses, univariate and bivariate, to look for factors that were associated with the decision to screen. And then we ran a multi-variable model, a logistic regression model, to look at predictors that held true in multivariable modeling. And so the analysis plan, though, like I said, was based on the theory of planned behavior, and it was also well planned out before we even sent out the survey. And future plans, I think it's, when I develop surveys, I'm always very mindful that you're interrupting people's time, you're asking them to do something when they could be doing something else, reading a magazine, spending time with their family. So I try to be really efficient, and if I can, without making the survey too cumbersome, I do try to consider, are there other critical analyses that I would like to have done. So yeah, with most of my surveys, there's usually at least sort of 3 or 4 priority analyses that I have anticipated well in advance, and I think about those. So for instance, we just did a survey in Africa, and we looked at acceptability of self-collection for cervical cancer screening, but we also did a bunch of questions for the CDC Atlanta to sort of test the technicality and the feasibility of those questions. We also then asked women about integration of family planning into cervical cancer screening. We also asked them about integration of breast cancer screening. So from that, there's about 3 or 4 different analyses that we can do that are all very relevant, and it took a bit of forethought, but once you do that, then you have the capability to answer some really critical questions well in advance.